Hidden in plain sight, Josephine Winters watched as Warren Hayes paced the conference room, his tailored suit jacket abandoned over a chair hours ago, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. She quietly slid a fresh cup of coffee onto the table near his notes, timing it perfectly so it wouldn't interrupt his train of thought. The executive team sat rapt, following his passionate explanation of Tech Fusion's newest innovation. The neural interface will revolutionize accessibility technology, Warren said, his deep voice commanding the room. The prototype is exceeding all expectations. Jo made a small note in her tablet. The prototype was actually behind schedule, but she'd rearranged his meetings for the next 3 weeks to accommodate the delay without anyone realizing there was a problem. Just as she'd negotiated with the development team to put in extra hours without burning them out. Just as she'd done 100 times before. Ms. Winters, Warren said without looking up from his presentation. Can you pull up the financial projections? Already queued, sir, Jo replied, tapping her tablet. The wall screen transitioned smoothly to the detailed charts she'd refined at 2 a.m. when the analytics team sent over the rough data. Warren nodded absently, continuing without acknowledgement of the hours she'd put into making those projections both accurate and visually compelling. To him, she was simply the efficient machine that kept his life running, invisible infrastructure. Later, as the executive team filed out, Jo collected the abandoned coffee cups and reorganized the scattered notes. At 32, she had spent the last 3 years anticipating Warren's needs, solving problems before they reached his desk, and creating the flawless environment in which his genius could thrive. Good meeting, Warren said, gathering his tablet. The board will approve the additional funding after seeing those numbers. I've already drafted the formal request, Jo said. It's in your email for review. Warren nodded, already looking at his phone. I need to get to that dinner with the Japanese investors. Did my suit arrive at the restaurant? Yes, along with a fresh shirt. The private dining room is ready, and I've briefed the chef on Mr. Tanaka's seafood allergy. Your talking points are on your phone, including notes on Mr. Tanaka's daughter's recent graduation. She's starting at Tokyo University next month. Warren paused, finally looking at her. For a moment, Jo thought he might actually see her, the woman who remembered that Mr. Tanaka had mentioned his daughter once in passing 6 months ago. Instead, he just nodded. Right, good. And then he was gone. Hurricane Warren moving on to his next conquest. Leaving Jo in the quiet aftermath, you know. One day you should ask for hazard pay for being invisible, said Tricia from accounting, leaning against the doorframe. The man would implode without you, Jo smiled, gathering the last of the papers. He's just focused. On everything except the person who makes his success possible, Tricia said. Are you coming to happy hour tonight? Daniel from legal keeps asking about you. Jo shook her head. Can't. I need to prepare for tomorrow's strategy session, and I promised Warren's mother I'd help coordinate her charity committee calls. It's her birthday next week. Tricia raised an eyebrow. You remember his mother's birthday, but I bet he doesn't know a single personal thing about you. Jo shrugged, ignoring the truth of the statement. It's my job to know these things. Your job description doesn't include being his social secretary or his mother's assistant. I'm good at what I do. Tricia, Jo straightened her simple gray pencil skirt, and Tech Fusion is doing important work. Later, alone in her modest apartment, Jo kicked off her sensible heels and heated up a frozen dinner. On her coffee table sat a stack of technical journals. She'd been teaching herself coding in her sparse free time. Not that Warren knew. He saw her as the perfectly efficient assistant, not as someone with ambitions and dreams of her own. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. Warren needed the Henderson contract revised again. With a sigh, Jo set aside her barely touched dinner and opened her laptop. Another late night being essential yet unseen. The invitation Jo's alarm chimed at 5:30 a.m. as usual. She moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, shower, simple makeup, hair pulled back in a neat bun, and a pressed navy pantsuit. By 6:15, she was at her desk in the empty Tech Fusion office, reviewing Warren's schedule and preparing briefings for his morning meetings. When her desk phone rang at 7:30, Jo answered immediately. Mr. Hayes' office. Josephine, darling, it's Eleanor Hayes. Jo smiled genuinely. Unlike her son, Warren's mother always saw her. Good morning, Mrs. Hayes. How are you feeling today? Better, dear. Those resources you found for my arthritis have been tremendous help. Eleanor's warm voice carried through the line. I'm calling about the Starlight Gala next month. The committee is finalizing details. Joe pulled up the relevant file. I have all the vendor contracts ready for your review. The venue is confirmed and the catering deposit has been paid. Wonderful, but that's not why I called. I wanted to make sure you received your invitation. Joe paused, fingers hovering over her keyboard. My invitation? Yes, dear. I put you on the guest list this year. After 3 years of orchestrating this event flawlessly, it's time you attended as a guest. Oh, Mrs. Hayes, that's very kind, but I'll be working that evening. Someone needs to make sure everything runs smoothly. Nonsense. I've hired an event coordinator specifically so you can enjoy yourself. Warren might not notice everything you do, but I certainly do. After hanging up, Joe stared at the formal invitation that had indeed arrived in her mailbox at home. Heavy cream cardstock with gold embossing announcing the Tech Fusion Starlight Charity Gala, the company's most prestigious annual event, benefiting children's technology education. For 3 years, Joe had orchestrated every detail from behind the scenes but had never attended as a guest. The elevator dinged, announcing Warren's arrival. He strode in, already on a call, barely nodding at Joe as she handed him his coffee and the day's agenda. She followed him into his office, notepad ready. The Nakamura meeting is in 15 minutes, she reminded him when he ended his call. Warren nodded distractedly, scrolling through emails. Did you revise the Henderson contract? It's in your inbox and I've highlighted the changes. I also took the liberty of adding a clause about intellectual property retention that legal suggested. He glanced up briefly. Good thinking. Joe hesitated, then said, Your mother called about the Starlight Gala. She's put me on the guest list. Warren looked confused for a moment. Why? Don't you usually handle the behind-the-scenes coordination? She's hired an event planner this year. Joe tried to keep her voice neutral. I can still oversee things remotely if you prefer. Warren waved dismissively. If Mother wants you to attend, then attend. She always gets her way. He returned to his emails, effectively dismissing her. At lunch, Joe picked at her salad while Tricia eyed her skeptically. So you're telling me Eleanor Hayes personally invited you to the gala? And you're thinking of turning it down to work instead? Tricia shook her head. Joe, this is your chance to be seen as more than just Warren's shadow. I wouldn't even know how to behave as a guest at something like that, Joe admitted. What would I wear? Who would I talk to? You'd wear something spectacular and talk to whoever you want, Tricia said firmly, including eligible bachelors who aren't your workaholic boss. Warren isn't, Joe started. Isn't what? Aware that you're a woman with a life outside this office? Tricia leaned forward. Joe, you've built your entire existence around making him successful. When do you get to shine? That evening, instead of working late, Joe found herself in a boutique downtown, urged there by Tricia's insistence. I can't afford anything here, Joe whispered as a saleswoman approached. You've been saving for 3 years with barely any social life, Tricia countered. Invest in yourself for once. To her surprise, Joe discovered she actually had an eye for fashion when she wasn't restricting herself to office-appropriate attire. A midnight blue gown caught her attention, elegant, with a subtle shimmer that reminded her of the night sky. Try it on, the saleswoman encouraged. In the dressing room, Joe slowly unzipped her practical work dress and slipped into the gown. The transformation in the mirror was startling. The woman reflected back wasn't Invisible Joe, the efficient assistant. This woman commanded attention. Her phone buzzed with a text from Warren. Need the Diaz proposal tonight, urgent. Joe's momentary confidence wavered. She started to reach for her work clothes, ready to rush back to the office. Then she paused, staring at her reflection again. For once, Warren Hayes could wait. I'll take it, she told the saleswoman, surprising herself with her decisiveness. That night, instead of working on the Diaz proposal, Joe registered for a styling workshop and researched sophisticated updos. The proposal could wait until morning. For the first time in 3 years, Joe Winters was putting herself first. The transformation. What do you mean you don't have the Diaz proposal? Warren stood in front of Joe's desk, his expression a mixture of disbelief and irritation. It was 7:45 a.m., and the office was still largely empty. Joe maintained eye contact, something she rarely did when he was displeased. I'll have it on your desk by 9, Mr. Hayes. I received your text after hours and prioritized finishing it this morning. Warren frowned. That's not like you, Josephine. I apologize for the inconvenience, she said calmly, though her heart raced. I was attending to a personal matter. He looked genuinely perplexed, as if the concept of Joe having personal matters was entirely foreign. Is everything all right? Yes, thank you for asking. She turned back to her computer, a subtle dismissal that she'd learned from watching him countless times. Warren lingered for a moment, thrown off by this small shift in their dynamic, then retreated to his office without another word. Over the next 3 weeks, small changes accumulated in Joe's life. She still arrived early and performed her duties impeccably, but she began leaving the office by 6 most evenings. She enrolled in a weekend coding workshop, finally pursuing the technical knowledge she'd been teaching herself piecemeal. She met with a personal stylist who helped her understand how to dress for her body type, and visited a salon where they shaped her plain brown hair into a layered style that framed her face elegantly. The afternoon before the gala, Tricia insisted on treating Joe to a spa day. Consider it my investment in your future, Tricia said as they received facials, because tomorrow everyone is going to see the Joe Winters I've always known was hiding under those sensible pantsuits. I'm nervous, Joe admitted. What if I make a fool of myself? Impossible, Tricia declared. You've memorized the background of every important person who will be there. You know more about proper etiquette than the Queen of England. The only difference is that tomorrow you're not there to make Warren look good. You're there to be yourself. That night, Joe stood in her apartment looking at the gown hanging on her closet door. Next to it lay the delicate silver jewelry she'd purchased. More extravagant than anything she'd ever owned, but still understated and elegant. On her dresser sat makeup she'd learned to apply during a lesson the previous weekend, subtle techniques that enhanced her hazel eyes and defined her cheekbones. Her phone buzzed with a text from Warren. Need you to check Henderson figures before tomorrow's meeting. Joe stared at the message. 3 weeks ago, she would have immediately opened her laptop and worked until midnight. Tonight, she typed, We'll review first thing in the morning. The figures aren't finalized until 9 a.m. anyway. She set her phone down, ignoring the immediate follow-up buzz. Tomorrow was about more than just a gala. It was about reclaiming parts of herself she'd surrendered to her job. Meanwhile, across town in his penthouse apartment, Warren paced as he dictated notes for an upcoming presentation. His personal assistant, Joe's after-hours counterpart, a young man named Darren, dutifully recorded everything. Ms. Winters didn't respond to my text, Warren said suddenly, interrupting his own flow. Darren looked up, surprised. It's after 9, sir. That's never mattered before, Warren muttered, then shook his head. Never mind. Where were we? The neural interface adoption timeline, Darren prompted. Warren nodded, but his mind wasn't fully engaged. Joe had been different lately, still efficient and dedicated, but somehow more present, as if she'd stepped out of the background and into sharper focus. It was unsettling, this change he couldn't quite define. Sir? Darren prompted after Warren had been silent for several moments. I think we're done for tonight, Warren decided. I need to prepare for tomorrow's gala. After Darren left, Warren stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city lights. The Starlight Gala was Tech Fusion's premier annual event, a celebration of the company's charitable foundation and an essential networking opportunity. His mother had founded the tradition, and since taking over the company 5 years ago, Warren had continued it with the same precision he applied to everything. His phone chimed with an email from his mother, reminding him to be charming tomorrow and to dance with at least 3 benefactors' daughters. Warren smiled slightly. Eleanor Hayes remained a force of nature even at 73. As he prepared for bed, Warren found himself thinking about Joe again. His mother had mentioned putting her on the guest list, which seemed odd. Joe was essential behind the scenes. She knew everyone's names, remembered their connections, anticipated problems before they arose. Having her as a guest seemed like wasting her talents. Still, his mother rarely did anything without purpose. Perhaps she saw something he didn't. Warren dismissed the thought. Tomorrow would be like every other Starlight Gala, predictable, profitable, and perfectly orchestrated. He had meetings to prepare for, investors to charm, and donations to secure. Everything else was secondary. As he drifted off to sleep, Warren had no idea that tomorrow would change everything. not because of a business deal or a wealthy donor, but because for the first time, he would truly see the woman who had been by his side all along. The recognition. The Starlight Gala transformed the National Art Museum into a celestial wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast starry reflections across the marble floors, while subtle blue lighting gave the grand hall an ethereal glow. Warren arrived precisely on time, greeting benefactors and business associates with practiced charm. He wore a classic black tuxedo that emphasized his tall frame and broad shoulders, looking every bit the successful CEO. "Warren, darling, you look dashing," Eleanor Hayes approached, resplendent in emerald green. She kissed her son's cheek before surveying the room with satisfaction. "Everything is perfect as usual." "All you're doing, Mother," Warren replied with genuine affection. "Or rather, your committees. And Josephine's," Eleanor added pointedly. "That girl thinks of everything." Warren nodded absently, already scanning the room for the Taiwanese investors he needed to speak with. "She's very thorough. She should be arriving soon as a guest," Eleanor continued. "I made sure she understood that working was absolutely forbidden tonight." Before Warren could respond, Maxwell Reed, CEO of rival tech company Neurosync, approached with his characteristic swagger. "Hayes," Maxwell greeted him with a firm handshake. "Impressive event, though I'd expect nothing less." Warren maintained his professional smile despite his distaste for the man. Maxwell had been trying to poach tech fusion talent for years, and had recently made a competing offer on the Henderson contract. "Reed, glad you could make it. Your donation to the foundation is appreciated." "Just doing my part," Maxwell replied smoothly. "Technology education benefits us all, doesn't it? Speaking of which, I heard your neural interface project is facing some delays." Warren's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "That information wasn't public." "You heard wrong," he said evenly. "We're right on schedule." Their tense exchange was interrupted by a subtle shift in the room's energy. Conversations paused, heads turned, and a path seemed to clear through the crowd. Warren followed Maxwell's suddenly distracted gaze toward the grand staircase. A woman descended, her midnight blue gown catching the light with each step. Her brown hair was swept up in an elegant style that revealed the graceful curve of her neck. She moved with quiet confidence, her posture perfect, her smile slight but genuine. Warren stared, transfixed. There was something familiar about her, yet he couldn't place it. "She was simply stunning. Who is that?" Maxwell murmured, already moving toward the staircase. The realization hit Warren like a physical force. Josephine? It was indeed Joe, but a Joe he'd never truly seen before. Not hidden behind a tablet or blending into the background of a meeting. This was Josephine Winters commanding a room full of the city's elite without saying a word. Warren watched, frozen in place, as Maxwell reached her at the bottom of the stairs and introduced himself. Joe smiled politely and, to Warren's surprise, engaged confidently in conversation. Of course she would. She probably knew Maxwell's entire business history and personal background from preparing Warren's briefings. "Close your mouth. Dear, you'll catch flies," Eleanor murmured beside him, amusement evident in her voice. "That's Joe," Warren said unnecessarily. "Indeed it is. The same Josephine who's worked tirelessly for you for 3 years. Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "Perhaps you're finally seeing what's been right in front of you all along." Warren made his way across the room, greeting people mechanically, his attention fixed on Joe and Maxwell. They were now joined by the head of the city's largest charitable foundation and the wife of a prominent senator. Joe was speaking animatedly, and everyone was listening intently. "And that's why early technology education is so crucial," Joe was saying as Warren approached. "It's not just about creating future engineers, but about fostering critical thinking skills that benefit any career path." "Josephine," Warren said, finally reaching her side. "You look..." Words failed him for perhaps the first time in his adult life. Joe turned, and for a brief moment he glimpsed surprise and something else. Vulnerability. Perhaps in her hazel eyes before her professional mask slipped back into place. "Mr. Hayes." She greeted him with a slight nod. "The event is lovely. Your mother and her committee did an amazing job. With your guidance, I'm sure," he said, finding his footing again. Ms. Winters was just sharing some fascinating insights about technology education accessibility. Maxwell interjected. "You've been hiding quite a resource, Hayes." Warren bristled at Maxwell's proprietary tone. Josephine is an invaluable member of the Tech Fusion team. As your assistant, yes, Maxwell said with a calculated smile. But I wonder if her talents might be better utilized in a more substantial role. Joe's eyebrows rose slightly and Warren felt a surge of unfamiliar panic. Was Maxwell trying to poach Joe right in front of him? If you'll excuse us, Warren said firmly, placing his hand lightly on Joe's elbow. I believe this is our dance. Before either could object, he guided Joe toward the dance floor where other couples were already moving to the orchestra's waltz. I don't recall agreeing to dance, Joe said quietly as Warren took her hand and placed his other hand respectfully at her waist. Consider it rescuing you from Reed's recruitment pitch, Warren replied, leading her into the dance with surprising grace. He's been trying to steal our best people for years. Joe followed his steps perfectly. Of course she would, Warren realized. She probably researched dance steps the moment she knew she'd be attending. Perhaps he recognizes talent, Joe said, meeting his gaze directly. Something you might consider doing more often. The gentle rebuke landed precisely. Warren looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. I've been blind, haven't I? Joe's expression softened. Focused elsewhere, she corrected. There's a difference. As they moved across the floor, Warren realized how perfectly they complemented each other's movements, just as they did in the office, but he'd never noticed. He'd always led and she'd always anticipated his next step. Why did you stay? He asked suddenly. 3 years of thankless work, invisible support? You could have gone anywhere. Joe considered the question, her eyes reflecting the starlight effects from above. Because the work matters, she said finally. And because I believed eventually you'd see me. The music ended, and they stood still for a moment while other couples moved around them. Warren felt as though something fundamental had shifted. But before he could speak again, Maxwell appeared at Joe's side. I believe I'm owed the next dance, he said smoothly, offering his hand to Joe. And perhaps a conversation about your future career options? New beginnings. Joe hesitated, her hand still resting lightly in Warren's. The choice before her felt monumental, symbolic of a larger decision about her future. Maxwell's interested gaze offered professional recognition and advancement, while Warren's newly awakened awareness promised. What exactly? Ms. Winters makes her own decisions, Warren said, reluctantly stepping back. His eyes met Joe's with an intensity she hadn't seen before. Always has, even when I failed to notice. Joe smiled slightly at this acknowledgement. Thank you, Mr. Reed, but I believe I need some air. The evening has been rather overwhelming. She moved with quiet grace toward the terrace doors, leaving both men watching her departure. Outside, the night air carried the first hint of autumn crispness. Joe took a deep breath, steadying herself against the stone balustrade. Josephine. Eleanor Hayes's voice came from the shadows. The older woman emerged, offering Joe a glass of champagne. You've caused quite a stir tonight. Joe accepted the drink with a grateful smile. That wasn't my intention. Perhaps not, but it was certainly mine. Eleanor's eyes twinkled with mischief. Sometimes men need a shock to see what's right in front of them, especially brilliant, driven men like my son. Mrs. Hayes, Eleanor, please. After 3 years of coordinating my charity work and remembering my birthday when my own son forgets, I think we're beyond formalities. Joe nodded, taking a small sip of champagne. Eleanor, I appreciate your kindness, but I'm not sure what you're hoping will happen. I'm hoping you'll stop diminishing yourself for the sake of my son's success, Eleanor said frankly. Whether that means demanding the recognition and promotion you deserve at Tech Fusion, accepting Mr. Reed's inevitable offer, or something else entirely, that's for you to decide. Inside, Warren searched the crowded room, nodding distractedly at greetings. He spotted Maxwell Reed speaking with a group of investors and felt a surge of relief that the man wasn't with Joe. Looking for someone, Tricia from accounting appeared at his side, eyebrow raised knowingly. Ms. Chen, Warren acknowledged. I was just looking for Joe, Tricia finished for him. Funny how sometimes we don't see what's right in front of us until someone else shows interest. Warren frowned. I value Josephine's work immensely. Her work, yes. But what about her? Tricia challenged. Do you know she's been teaching herself coding? That she single-handedly resolved the neural interface timeline issue by working with the development team directly? That she's turned down 2 job offers in the past year because she believes in what Tech Fusion is doing? Warren stared at her, absorbing this new information. I didn't know. Of course not. Because you never asked. Trisha's expression softened slightly. She's on the terrace with your mother. And Mr. Hayes? If you're going out there, decide what you actually want first. Joe deserves that much. Warren found Joe and his mother engaged in quiet conversation on the terrace. The moonlight silvered Joe's gown, making her appear almost ethereal. Mother, would you mind if I spoke with Josephine alone? Warren asked, approaching them. Eleanor smiled knowingly. Not at all. I should check on the dessert presentation anyway. She squeezed Joe's hand before departing, leaving a charged silence in her wake. Warren moved to the balustrade, standing beside Joe. Reed will offer you a job tonight, he said without preamble. Probably director of operations, given your skill set. Joe turned to study his profile. Probably, she agreed. You should consider it. The words seemed to pain him. You deserve recognition. If I failed to provide that at Tech Fusion, then perhaps NeuroSync would be better for your career. Joe's eyes widened in surprise. Are you firing me, Mr. Hayes? Warren, he corrected, turning to face her fully. And no, God, no. I'm acknowledging that I've taken you for granted. And that's unforgivable. Inside, the orchestra began a new piece, the music drifting out to the terrace like a gentle current. 3 years ago, Warren continued, I hired an executive assistant. What I got instead was a partner who anticipated problems before they arose, who remembered the human details I overlooked, who quietly shaped Tech Fusion's success from the shadows. He took a deep breath. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you. Joe considered his words carefully. What exactly are you offering, Warren? Professionally? A promotion, Director of Strategic Operations, reporting directly to me. A position that acknowledges the work you've already been doing and expands your authority. And personally? Joe asked quietly. Warren stepped closer, his usual confidence replaced by genuine vulnerability. A chance. To start again, to see each other clearly. No power dynamics, no expectations, just two people discovering if there's something beyond the professional connection we've built. Joe looked out over the gardens, weighing his words. The professional promotion sounds suspiciously like a counteroffer to keep me from going to NeuroSync. It is, Warren admitted candidly. But it's also long overdue regardless of Reed's interest. And the personal aspect? Is entirely separate, Warren assured her. Your career advancement stands regardless of anything else between us. I may have been blind, Josephine, but I'm not unethical. Joe turned back to him, her expression thoughtful. I've spent 3 years being invisible, defining myself by how well I could anticipate your needs and make your life easier. I'm not sure I know who I am outside of that role. I'd like the chance to find out, Warren said softly. If you would. Inside, Maxwell Reed appeared at the terrace doors, scanning for Joe. His gaze landed on them and he started to move in their direction. Reed's coming, Warren murmured. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. Joe straightened her shoulders, a new confidence in her posture. Mr. Reed, she called, stopping Maxwell in his tracks. I appreciate your interest, but I'll need to decline any employment discussions tonight. I already have a meeting scheduled tomorrow morning to discuss my promotion to Director of Strategic Operations at Tech Fusion. Maxwell's expression flickered with disappointment before settling into his usual smooth smile. Can't blame a man for trying. The offer remains open, Ms. Winters, should you ever reconsider. He nodded to Warren and retreated inside. Tomorrow morning, Warren said, a small smile playing at his lips. I wasn't aware we had a meeting scheduled. A.M., Joe confirmed with newfound assertiveness. I've taken the liberty of preparing a detailed outline of my proposed responsibilities and compensation requirements. Warren's smile widened. Of course you have. As for the other matter, Joe continued, a hint of vulnerability returning to her voice, I think we both need time to redefine our professional relationship first, and to discover who we are to each other without the imbalance that's existed between us. Warren nodded, genuine respect in his eyes. I'd like to start by properly asking you to dance, he said, extending his hand. Not as your boss, not as a CEO rescuing you from a competitor, but simply as a man who is finally seeing the remarkable woman who's been beside him all along. Joe placed her hand in his, feeling the equal exchange of the gesture for the first time. I'd like that. As they moved back inside to the dance floor, Eleanor Hayes watched from across the room, satisfaction evident in her smile. The transformation wasn't just in how Warren saw Joe now, or in Joe's elegant appearance. It was in the way they moved together as equals, each fully visible to the other at last. Later that night, as the gala wound down, Joe found herself once again on the terrace, this time alone with her thoughts. The evening had brought changes she couldn't have anticipated, opening doors she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. Tomorrow would bring challenges, redefining her role at Tech Fusion, establishing new boundaries with Warren, discovering who Josephine Winters was when she stepped fully into the light. But for the first time in years, Joe looked toward the future with something beyond professional satisfaction. As she gazed up at the stars, Joe smiled to herself. Sometimes transformation wasn't about becoming someone new, but about finally being seen for who you'd been all along.